Alright, in the previous video we went over the spotted body material frame and we set it up. I'm just going to reset some values so we can talk about the technical aspects of this. So base color goes back to white and then emission goes back to black, and then we're back to the line color we started with. Let me pull over Inspector so I can talk about how this works. So the first thing to note is that everything is parented to a positional thing at the top here. This enables everything to be moved kind of relative to the central point. I used to have it that the top item in Material Frame 3 was a texture frame, but that caused some oddities that were kind of like hard to figure out. So the first part that's kind of magic is the automatic naming here. That's driven by a label property within the UI elements. UI elements are stuff you don't have to touch. That's why they're in UI elements. And then you'll see here spotted body as a label and spotted body. Spotted body is the text part of a text renderer, and that's written to the value copy here as the target, and the source is the slot name here. So if I pull out a copy of this, this value here, name, is written to the source, and then the target is the text here. But I have a value copy property called writeback enabled, and that means that it's a two-way operation. Both sides can write the value and it will sync them across globally. So you'll see here, and that's really cool, because you'll see here I can rename it in this vector as spotted body, I don't know, to spotted body 2. And you'll see spotted body 2 is in the label already. And I can deselect everything, select the inspector thing, and then I can go here and call it spotted body, I don't know, 4. And that's also renamed that. So that's how that works. I find that magical. I'm a bit sort of obsessive about keeping my worlds tidy. And so this will really help keeping your material frames organized. In the heat of fixing a problem with one of these worlds, you need to know the chest fluff number 5 is the shorts of the avatar. That's it for the label. As for the texture frame, the texture frame uses this asset frame slot iTexture2D. I first found these in Business Lawyer's particle setup world, but they're very generic. You just add this component and it'll automatically create this frame object for you. The frame size is how big the frame is, and then the snap time is how quickly things go into it. I leave those pretty much the same, but if you wanted I don't know, a faster or slow animation, you could change that. If you wanted a larger frame, you can change that. I don't change them much though. You can also use these texture frames as like portrait places to put pictures in. We do that in the gallery world, again by Gearbell. So you can just drop in a picture. We turn off the frame, not the slot, because that's needed for colliders, but we turn off the mesh renderer there so that you can't see the edge. And then we align it with the picture frame in the museum that's in the gallery. There is a tiny piece of Logix on the frame which I'd like to talk about. So all the Logix does is it turns on or off this overlay property. The overlay property is a quad, which is sized exactly to the size of the frame here using a value copy. So again here the frame size gets written to here from the frame up here. So 0.5 from frame size here gets written to 0.5, 0.5 here. And then on the overlay, we value copy the 0.5 from the frame into the overlay. And now the overlay is a copy of the material here that's applied to the avatar, but it's applied to a quad. And so that net effect is it gives you the texture file again. But because it's now a material and not a picture, we can apply the color values to it. And so all the Logix here does is it checks if the texture frame asset frame slot has a current value here. See current underscore current. I'll unpack the Logix so you can take a look. I don't know where it's going to be. Oh, that's actually okay. So the asset frame is here, and then we are looking at the current value of it, and then we are dereferencing the reference. That basically gets like, what does the reference point to? In this case, it points to a slot. And then we check if that slot's not null, using not null, and then we just turn the overlay on or off. That's all the Logix in this thing. as the overlay has that material on it, so if I go to the mesh render and pull the material out, it's the same material that's in there. And so if I change this to red, you'll see this changes to red. And so that's what allows you to see the colors. If I pull the texture out, you can see it's not red, but the moment I snap it in, it is red. There's also a tiny 3D effect that occurs when you use cutout materials. I'm not bothered by that. It's not really noticeable when you put it on a background. That syncs up those values. You'll see the image actually gets it gets parented under the texture frame. So here's the actual image. Next is the color selectors. So the color selectors are this component called Neos Color Dialog. The Neos Color Dialog has a target field property, and target field will automatically sync the value of the dialog to the target field. So what we did in the setup video was we set the target field to be the property on the material. So we set it to be this color property here. It doesn't drive it, it just writes it, which is why this is not pink. So it just writes it on changes. So we have two of those. We have color selector and then emission selector. When using these things, it's super important to turn off either show header or show handle. If you have those on, then the UI gets a bit more bulky because it's the state where it's like floating in the world and you can look at it. So there's the difference there on the emission and on the normal color. Don't worry about the rest of the content here or anything like that. You don't need to touch it. Just change the target field here. As for turning those on and off, there are, I need to rename this. There's an albedo color button, which is the painter's easel thing. I don't know what you call it, the hand thing. Ask Bob Ross, I don't know. And then it is a touch toggle. And so touch toggle basically turns a state on or off when you touch it. And we're using a super cool component tutorial on this one dedicated to it because I found it the other day. I love it. Value multi-driver. This takes a value and then drives it to these lists, and there can be an unlimited amount of lists here. So it's a good idea if you need to do multiple value copies. I've turned 2 value copies into 1 value copy. So we value copy the state value from the albedo color button from the albedo color button's touch toggle state here into the value of the value multi-driver. So that means that when I touch this, it turns this off, which then turns off these 2 properties. This one is the active state of the active button icon and also the active state of the color selector. So when I turn this back on, you'll see that the color selector here goes solid black rather than partially black. Oh, like faded, however you want to call that. The other thing that's happening here is that the active button icon turns on. The active button icon is a green version of the white one. Neos does deduplication of textures, so it's okay to do that. It's using the same image file for both. It's just a different material with a different color. The active button icon has a box collider on it, and the box collider is offset a little bit. The reason why it's offset is that the box collider, when activated by the active state of the slot, renders over the other button. And that's what prevents you from having both open. I just didn't want the confusion of having 2 open because they'll layer on top of each other. So that's how that works. And there are 2 of those, one for each of the color selectors. On the second one, there is a box collider that goes the other way, so it overlaps that one. The last thing is the material frame. Material frames are a bit odd in that they still want you to use the, hold on, let me reset the colors here. Oh, that's emission. That was bad. They still want to use the frame mesh here. I didn't like the frame mesh, so I had the idea of using a torus. So you'll see the material frame here. It still needs to be present because it's what does the snapping of the material frame using the box collider here. But its mesh renderer is turned off, so you can't see it. Guess we don't need the material here either. There we go. That's saved your material. So you can't see the frame mesh, but I've actually created a second element called a torus. A torus is just a ring, and then the ring is scaled so that it's a little bit wider than it is tool. So you'll see here on the Y value it's 0.5, and that creates the depth, so it looks like a slot. I'm just going to pull one of these out and put it back in again, and you'll see what that looks like. It's aligned with the corner just to keep things tidy. Under the material frame, there's also a target value. The target value here refers back to the overlay. And so that's how we get the overlay fully working. It combines the overlay's material gets set to the material that gets put in there. And that's why when setting it up, you need to make sure that the texture is in and the material is in before it will show up. That's, I think, all there is to it. If you didn't understand any of the concepts here, there's a tutorial on each segment separately. So for spotted bodies, automatic renaming, look for the tutorial on value copy. I do need to update that one to cover right back though. For the value copy, there's a tutorial on that. We use that to turn on a light in the tea house. I call it garden house interchangeably. For color selectors, there's nothing there yet, but those are quite straightforward. Actually, you can use the Neos UI direct drive field tutorial for that one. So what else is there? The Logix does require the reference node. This is a new one. I love it. It's really useful. It can be a bit unwieldy to understand what a reference means. It's basically like a pointer to a value, not the actual value. So take a look out for maybe a more in-depth tutorial on what those mean. The touchable, I did have a tutorial on that. I don't think I uploaded it, so I'll get that uploaded. And then multi-value driver will come today because I love that component. Hope this helps. I wanted to do a technical overview. I actually had a request from, I think it was Zab, who loved seeing the videos of the tab system, but wanted to kind of understand the guts of it. So here's to you, Zab. Thank you for asking for it. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments. You'll find this in my public folder. Check the previous video of how to set it up. I hope it's useful. So that's very creepy. It's like the red lips and then the green tongue. Oh, there we go. Bye-bye.